Hi, morning, Mike.
Morning,
And
Nick. How are you?
good, thanks. Yes, and good to see everyone who's joining us. Following on from a recent post that we've done on accreditation of ITE providers, it seems that there is another issue looming on the horizon. That is teacher recruitment, which seems to be in the news at the moment. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
what
I mean,
what what's going on there?
it's dire, essentially. There were a number of articles, I think, that followed this up in the media, predominantly, I think Newsweek, in which it talked about secondary school targets for recruitment have been missed by over 40%. I mean, and don't forget that this was already, teacher recruitment, teacher supply into schools was already in a bad place. So, the teacher crisis, the teacher supply crisis really has been going on for the best part of 4 years, actually, probably more, five. And, to be going from bad to worse is just potentially a catastrophe. It really is. And I guess you're right to make a link to the accreditation of ITE providers, because teacher training is going through a very, very significant reform process at the moment, which requires all training providers to reaccredit themselves. And this has led to many, many, many good providers, some of them outstanding, according to Ofsted, having to close in 2024 or go into some sort of loose partnership with another accredited provider. It's very mysterious, and it doesn't seem to make any pragmatic sense to be
Mm.
going through this process at this time.
Yeah, it does seem to be odd that these two things are happening at once. What do you think is the thinking behind it?
Well, I don't know if it is odd. I mean, I think that they're probably connected, because if you were somebody who is in a job that you're not really enjoying very much, and you think, you know what, I would quite like to retrain and become a teacher, for the sort of next part of my career, or something like that. If you're one of those people, and then you start to research, you start to Google, get into teaching, or what do I need to do to become a teacher, the first things that are going to come up are headlines and articles about the reaccreditation process for ITE providers. So you're going to be applying to providers that you're not sure are going to exist, when you actually get onto the programs. The other thing, actually, which, and this has sort of only just kind of eked out this week, was that the DofE announced that School Direct will cease to exist from 2024. So in other words, the school led pathway into teaching, where schools would take the lead in recruiting and in sort of caring for their trainees, and they would buy into a university provision for the sort of theoretical level 7 modules. That's just coming to an end, 2024.
So that's three things that are impacting all
Yeah,
negatively on teacher recruitment. And
yeah,
there'll be a link below to a Guardian article and a Twitter um, uh, piece of data from Twitter suggesting that teachers that the targets that are being missed subject by subject, um, and physics is at the top
yeah,
of that list, for example. Always been difficult to recruit there, because I guess because people who've got physics degrees or maths degrees usually
yeah.
find satisfaction in careers elsewhere.
Mm.
Um, but this reminds me of something that was said in one of our articles that we've posted previously on the teacherlearning.org website,
Mm.
um, where it was it the schools minister Nick Gibbs said universities are the problem. I mean,
Yes. Oh, yeah,
he's now
yeah,
back in, isn't he? He's now back in the government. Um,
yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying this is all to do with him, but that's just something that he said in the past.
Yes. Oh, he's written articles like that. I mean, I remember there was one about 7 or 8 years ago in which he talked about you know, the unions aren't the problem, it's
Mm,
the universities are the problem. I mean, this is where you go into a rather dogmatic, you know, I suppose, approach that the government appears to be making towards education. I think that this approach I mean, you sometimes you heard Gove talking like this, is that, you know, their perception is that universities are just full of left-wing, you know, Marxists, and they need to be purged essentially, or sidelined. And I think this is the sort of hostile environment, you know, that they want to create for them. And so therefore it's actually a political game, you know, rather than a societal imperative, you know, to make sure that our children, I mean, you know, we talk about the impact of COVID, and I think that that is immense, you know, that's huge. And I know that schools are really, really struggling for all sorts of reasons, with the children that they have, because they are slightly different from the children that they had before the pandemic. You know,
mm,
they haven't had the same 2 years that a normal
yeah.
school experience would have provided, and that's impacting in all sorts of hidden and unpredictable ways.
Mm,
Um, but you know, to then, you know, sort of have a crisis of recruitment where there's not enough staff as well, just it's just adding problem
insult
after
to injury.
problem.
Mm.
Yeah, it really is. It
So,
really is.
so uh, what do you think is the government's rationale? What are they trying to
Well,
achieve?
yeah, well, as I said, I think it is because fundamentally they don't really care. And I think what matters to them much more is scoring a hit, you know, against you know, universities, against sort of maybe sort of left-wing thinking. Um, I mean, I know they would deny that, and certainly, you know, they would answer that by saying, well, no, there's nothing you know, left or right wing about the ITE curriculum that they want providers to follow. And this is enshrined in the core content framework and the early career framework. And there's a lot of that is perfectly good sense. There's nothing particularly, I would say, controversial about the content that's laid out in those frameworks. But you know, teaching is a whole lot more than what's written in those documents,
Mm,
even though they already stretch to 50 pages or so. There's a whole lot more to it than just that. And I think that there's probably a financial calculation in this, in that if you take universities away from teacher education and you put it back into schools, or you put it into schools, can we train teachers on the cheap? So in other words, can we just throw teachers into classrooms and let them learn on the job? I think that's probably you know, what they're looking for.
so to achieve the double goal of maybe sidelining of opinions that are not that they don't think are appropriate in education, and on the other hand, speeding up the process of getting teachers into classrooms.
Yeah.
And presumably the new Institute of Teaching has got something to do with this.
Well, they're the sort of you know, the flagship sort of provider, which is said to have already been accredited, but I'm not aware that it has gone through the same process that all the other providers are having to go through. So is this already a kind of shoe in?
Mm,
You know, is it going to submit itself to Ofsted inspections? you know, in the same way that other providers have to? You know, it's a number of these things aren't clear. I mean, I presume the answer is yes to those questions, but it's not, to my mind, been confirmed. But yes, the idea is to give this Institute of Teaching degree awarding powers. And as far as I can see, any other providers of ITE are going to be measured against the, you know, the criteria and the sort of provision of the Institute of Teaching. And if you don't comply, well, then you're going to be no good. So it's absolute faith, you know, in the sort of criteria of the Institute of Teaching. So it's going to be a very hierarchical, very top down. All of the things that, you know, we know only too well, Nick, are often doomed. And yes, they do create change, they do reform the sector, but it is another thing entirely as to whether it actually brings about the intended outcomes. I mean, the most important imperative now is to attract people into the profession, and I'm afraid that's going to be expensive. You know, so if you're trying to you know, save money on your teacher education, you're probably going to have to invest in order to do that. So it's kind of, you know, pay money in order to save money kind of an approach. But yeah,
I mean, I'm not quite sure. I'm not clear where any savings can be made from this at all, because there's one thing that you have to have every day in schools, and that is you have to have people in front of pupils.
yes,
You just have to have that. And with this almost double or even triple negative effect on that, with the reduction in accredited suppliers, providers of ITE, with the reduction in recruitment, the missing of the targets, you know, making the biggest contribution to, and then you've got the usual suspects of physics and maths and science that are under recruited for anyway. You've got a terrible situation where the education post-COVID is going to be weaker than it's just going to get weaker before it gets stronger.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, completely. It's really hard to have any kind of optimism about this. It's, you know, because I'm sort of, I just worry about my own children, you know, because it's children who are going to suffer, and the children are the future. And you know, this just seems to make absolutely no sense. And it's another example, I'm afraid, of young people just copying it. You know, it seems like they just seem to be getting and just the rawest of raw deals, you know, from you know, government, from, you know, society in general. It's just tragic, I think, really tragic.
It's really shocking. If you know, if this trend continues, who are they going to put in front of these classes? I mean, schools generally are at the limit. You know, they're, in terms of class sizes. Not all schools, obviously, but the majority of state sector schools of any reasonable size are optimizing their classes to, you know, 28, 30 pupils. You know, that's what you do, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So there's no wiggle room there unless you go above 30.
No, and then you see you're turning teachers basically into a supervising role. You know, so you're not. I mean, look, I've got a question for you, Nick. You know what? If I was to ask you this question, what would you say? What exactly are we doing, or should we be doing, when we train teachers? What exactly is the nub of a good training program for teachers? What do we actually want our teachers to be able to do?
We want them. We want them to have. First of all, you've got to have some kind of fundamental subject knowledge or lens through which to look, to which to teach people to look at the world in the way of through that lens.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. You have got to have subject knowledge. Then you've got to be able to excite and inspire people through the process of learning. Because, well, I mean, I've got a fairly nice way of putting it. I learned very quickly in the school I'm in right now, the children will learn what you believe. They don't learn what you tell them. They learn what you truly believe, because they see through any dishonesty. They spot it a mile off. I think children are very good at that. And then the third thing for me would be the ability to reflect on what you've done, and the process of professionalization, where as you become a better teacher by learning from failure, as Dylan William puts it, to fail a little bit less each day, which is the principles of the medical profession, the legal profession, and should be the principles of teaching. To learn from failure and not be penalized as a result of failure, unless you're actually negligent. But I meet very few teachers. I'm not sure, I can name any or many at all. But teachers generally wake up in the morning and they want to do a good job. And if they feel that's possible,
absolutely right.
If they feel that's possible, then that would be the third thing. So for me, that's what it's about. Looking at the world through the lens of your subject, being able to infuse the learning of that through your interaction in classes, and then being able to reflect on what happened and improve. I mean, what do you think?
Oh, I agree. I completely agree. I mean, I suppose, there are different words I suppose you could use for it, but I don't have any issue with what you've said there at all. But you see, it is, it's one of those things where it requires some thought, doesn't it? You can't just get into a pithy one-liner as to what we want our teachers to be able to do. It's an enormous job. It's a complicated job, and it's a highly intellectual activity to teach, not just because of the subject knowledge demands it makes of teachers, but also the fine-grained judgments and decisions that you have to make on the basis of what you're presented with in the classroom. But I do think that a lot of these reforms, now I don't know if this is the intention, but I can predict that this is what will happen as a result of the accreditation reforms. It will be reduced into a set of techniques teaching. And, essentially, teachers just have to learn, know, and do this. And it will be presented to teachers like that. And therefore, to have their autonomy, their decision-making taken away from them, I think is doom. It's not a good well, it's not professionalizing.
No, it's the exact opposite, actually.
You're creating technicians. You're not actually professionalizing.
Oh, well, then we can pay them less.
Well, exactly. You've got to sort of suspect that that's the issue, but you can't do that because everyone's on strike. And because people can't put food on their tables under the sort of salaries that are common these days. When I was clearing out some things from the dad's stuff. This was maybe 6 or 7 months ago. I picked up a little stack of newspapers that he'd kept, and these were newspapers I think from the mid-90s, quite some time ago now, and they had the jobs section still, the job supplement in there. And I had a quick look, and I was staggered. I was astonished that the starting salaries that were being advertised in these positions were exactly the same as the starting salaries today.
Pretty
much.
Right. Okay.
You know, for
For
all
which
sorts of
roles?
jobs.
All sorts of
Well,
jobs.
these weren't teaching jobs.
Okay.
They were other jobs. You know,
Mm,
they were some of them were school based. You know,
mm,
but they were sort of secretarial.
mm,
You know, secretaries, 15 grand a year.
mm, mm.
Um, and you know, accountants. You know, early sort of start
Yeah.
accountants, 22,000. You
Right.
know, and
Mm.
this is not exactly different from the kind of salaries that professions start off with today. I mean, I'm staggered that that's just not changed.
Wow.
And you know, this I mean, this is the wider political problem I know that we're facing, but this transformation into a low wage, low growth, low productivity, you know, economy is just absolutely naked for us all to see. Um,
And yet, what's being espoused by the government is, of course, growth and increasing in productivity. But um, I don't know how scuppering education
well,
or
exactly,
is going
exactly,
to achieve that, because
exactly.
that's where it all starts, surely.
Exactly.
Um,
Education and our education system, no matter what we think about what its flaws are, has a good reputation in the
mm,
world. You know, people who have British degrees carry around with them a great deal of cultural capital, global cultural capital, you know, in the world. They're
well,
sought after, you know.
perhaps that's the family silver that's being sold at the moment. Then,
Mm, yeah. Well,
um,
yeah.
mm, okay.
Anyway,
So,
I am. We probably need to
yeah,
finish there. It's a bit gloomy one, really, just for a week before Christmas festivities and celebrations. I will be posting a little blog about it because I do feel really sort of concerned. But next week it is Christmas and it's a time for families. It's a time for festivities, and I wish you, Nick, and everybody who's listening today a peaceful and restful Christmas and Yuletide break, and obviously a happy new year as well, 2023. Let's hope it is. Let's hope it's better than the last couple of years.
great. Okay, thanks for that, Mike. Right, bye everyone.
Bye.